begin.
We light this chalice for beautiful survival, for knowing how beautiful it is to survive in a broken world, to survive amongst flame and brokenness, to survive amongst and with love. We come now together in song with hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
It is so wonderful to be gathered once again and to be gathered virtually and physically in song. Welcome this morning to worship at First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Welcome to our choir members and to those attending here in person and to those attending from all over via Zoom. Whether you're right here in Bedford or many states away, we're so glad you're with us. I'm very excited this morning that I get to introduce our guest preacher, Reverend Joe Murphy, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister and the new Executive Director of UU MassAction. And you'll hear a little more about UU MassAction when it comes time for the offering, as we are sharing our plate with them. But as Joe is someone I know quite well, she is one of my housemates. I'm delighted that I get to share her with you all as well. She's a UU minister who grew up in Framingham, a lifelong UU, who also is passionate about justice and having a lot of fun and beauty and flowers. So I'm excited to hear her message about grief and justice this morning. She also spent years as a hospital chaplain, including during the recent pandemic. So the grief and justice are both strong themes. In terms of announcements today, we have a couple events. One is that if anything in your personal or our collective lives has you feeling like you might want to smash something, you're welcome to come. You know, it could be true. So you can come join us at 1 p.m. on the Common in front of the church. I have some thrift store plates and some old broken pottery. You're welcome to bring your own smashables. And we will have some feeling catharsis together in safe ways. We will be safe. You can bring safety goggles if you're so moved, but we'll be careful. And then at 3 o'clock, there is a Lyceum today online that you can learn about circadian rhythms, which I think is a very interesting topic. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. And then there's one piece in the order of service that I just wanted to correct. It says coming of age is at 6, but it's actually at 3. So just in case anyone was confused, just be aware. All right. Well, on that note, please rise in body or in spirit and join in our unison affirmation printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Our reading today is The Strong Man Who Cried, adapted by Rabbi Baruch Gelman. Jacob cried a lot. Jacob cried when he was happy, Jacob cried when he was sad, but most of all, Jacob cried when he saw beautiful things. The sight of a fresh new flower or sunset would fill him with happiness, and he would just cry. He just couldn't help it. But his father Isaac was not happy about having a son who cried a lot. Isaac would not take Jacob hunting because Jacob would cry at the thought of some furry little animal becoming his supper. So Isaac would take his other son Esau, who loved to hunt and never cried. Why can't you be more like your brother? Isaac would scold Jacob. He hunts and fights and never cries. He is a true man. And Jacob would answer, I cry when I feel like crying. I just can't change that. Then Isaac would stomp off, kick the dirt, and mutter strange words. Meanwhile, Rachel, who was Jacob's cousin, living in a place called Haran, was also having trouble with her father. Rachel was a shepherd, and this drove her father Laban crazy. Day and night he would yell at her, get away from those sheep and goats. Why can't you be more like your sister Leah? She doesn't smell like sheep. She sits in the tent and cooks and sews. She is a real woman. And Rachel would answer, I like being a shepherd. I just can't change that. Then her father would stomp off, kick the dirt, and mutter strange words. But there was one part of shepherding that Rachel did not like. The well for watering the flocks had to be corked up each day so a huge rock would be rolled in front of it. The water would not gush out and dry up. The rock was so big that every morning all of the shepherds in the area had to push together to move the rock off the well. And every night they had to gather again to push it back on. One day on the way to morning rock pushing, Rachel saw a new man at the well. He was small, with warm brown eyes, and was talking with the other shepherds at the well. Suddenly, this little man, all by himself, pushed the big rock off the well. The shepherds were amazed. The man approached Rachel and said, My name is Jacob, the son of Isaac and Rebekah. I am your cousin, and I've been on a long journey. I'm very happy to see you. Then they hugged, and Jacob started to cry because Rachel was so very beautiful. The other shepherds saw Jacob crying, and they said, He is strong, but real men don't cry. And they walked away. But Rachel did not leave Jacob. She sat by him on the rock, and they watched the flocks drink from the well. Rachel said, I never saw a man as strong as you who cries. Jacob looked at Rachel and said, I never saw a woman as beautiful as you who is a shepherd. They laughed, and Jacob cried, and then after a time, they went home together.
So, as I mentioned, we're going to be sharing our plate this morning, as we do on First Sundays, and we're going to be sharing with UU MassAction. So, I was a big fan of UU MassAction even before my housemate became the executive director, so just want to put that out there. Though I may be interpersonally biased, I really do think they do phenomenal work. They are our statewide advocacy network, bringing Unitarian Universalists and others all over the state of Massachusetts together to fight for the kind of legislation we need in our state. They work on some key issue areas that include environmental justice, racial justice, immigration justice. And I've found that their organizing is really incredible because they work with frontline organizations who are people who are experiencing the deepest impacts of some of these issues, and they bring Unitarian Universalists, who often tend to be more folks who are less directly impacted, along on the justice journey to use our power, our resources, in order to affect change, and I think that's a really brilliant thing. So Joe will tell us a little more about UU MassAction.
Annie. So again, I'm Jo Murphy, the new director at UU MassAction. I spent the last 2 years working as a chaplain at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and I've been delighted to dive into the work of UU MassAction. Our role is to organize and mobilize UUs to provide pathways for us to live our shared values through this work. This year's campaigns, as Annie mentioned a few, are climate and environmental justice, indigenous rights, immigrant and economic justice, and ending the torture of solitary in Massachusetts prisons and jails. In a time when burnout and despair are rampant, I have been working to create and craft systems where our organizing and advocacy work can bring about sustaining hope and new possibilities. In this realm, I've been working on a new leadership initiative for our regional teams, as well as a UU MassAction Youth Corps. Our donations today will go towards supporting our campaigns, our staff, and the justice work we do with our partners and coalitions and our frontline groups. I invite you all to stay connected to this work by signing up for our weekly newsletter or joining our regional teams. You can find links to both these opportunities on our website, uumassaction.org, or just do a light Google of UU MassAction. And in the name of pursuing hope through delight, I will end in a limerick. There once was a nonprofit for justice. To secure honor for people was a mustus. with mobilizing and legislative action as a need, for the flame of justice is something one must feed, while working tirelessly for a movement that is always beyond just us. Thank you so much. In remote forests in Madagascar, there is an orchid that is somewhat star-shaped, a delicate branching of white petals, and it is called the star of the forest. This orchid may look delicate, and one may think the name comes from its shape, but it is also the star of the forest because it grows in complete darkness. This isn't just a survival technique for it. This orchid thrives in darkness. It gets its nutrients from underground fungus, does not have chlorophyll for photosynthesis, but cuts through the forest dirt every so often to attract pollinators such as ants. I loved reading about this orchid for many reasons. The first being that we are still in winter, and even though the days are getting somewhat longer, they're still a bit short for me. And though I may hate it when the sun goes down, I love knowing that there is so much thriving in darkness. This orchid is also a reminder for me about the ability for life to survive and thrive in unexpected places, in dark forest floors that may be threatened by our destruction of the earth, at least for now host orchids. Beautiful, delicate pieces of joy, thriving orchids that live happily and healthily in the dark. This winter, I have been in need of the possibility that exists within thriving orchids. I have found myself as a leader of an incredible organization, UU MassAction, working alongside organizers on legislation, advocacy, and change in the areas of climate, environmental, indigenous justice, decarceration, and economic justice. In these movement spaces doing this work, I find myself standing in that awkward space of not being very hopeful, but having hope for the possibility of hope. I know that people have the capacity to do even better, but I have seen again and again that we do not always act on this capacity. When thinking about what blocks my ability to move from having hope and hope to just hope, I think about my ability to grieve. I believe that if we take the time and space to grieve and be in grieving, we will have a greater capacity for joy, for delight, and we need this joy, we need this delight to continue in these movement spaces, to continue to remember why we fight. The other night I was watching Queer Eye, the popular makeover show on Netflix that includes 4 men and a non-binary person who go around redesigning houses, routines, wardrobes. The first episode of the new season is interrupted by COVID, filmed partly pre-pandemic, and then the audience is alerted that the show has shut down. We are then alerted that Queer Eye checks in on the family a year later and films the rest of the episode after the family has gone through the height of the pandemic. When we meet back up with the Fab Five, the audience is informed the Broken Spoke family has had a difficult year. There is nothing particularly surprising about this statement. In fact, it is rare to find someone who has not had a difficult year, who has not had a difficult set of years. For whatever reason, reading this at that moment made me burst into tears. I then proceeded to cry on and off for the next 3 episodes of a reality TV show that, though is touching, is not particularly devastating or tear-jerking. I just needed to cry. I was reminded of the Adrienne Marie Brown quote, "Remember, you are water. Of course you are crying. Of course you leave salt trails. Of course you are crying." I have a friend who also watched the same episodes, sending me 2 texts. The first saying, "I cried during that episode too." And the second said, "Well, actually I cried during them all." Again, I don't think this phenomenon has much to do with this reality makeover show that I of course love. I think these tears are speaking to living in a time, in a world that often doesn't honor or hold space for grieving. We have also lost spaces to grieve. We see our coworkers often still on screens for meetings. There are less opportunities for people to just be present to one another's grief. As a leader of UU MassAction, as an organizer, part of accepting grief is necessary to staying in the work, to staying connected to our world. Not only do we need to grieve, we are grieving in the midst of so many losses and circumstances that persist, that continue. We are tired of making so many decisions that are not flippant decisions, but that relate to our survival. We are tired of making decisions about where and when we can hug our loved ones. We are tired of having lived through uprisings and seeing racism viciously persist. We are tired of deportations continuing and immigration detention still filling up when we are told by our leaders, by our presidents, that this would stop. We are tired of wars or threats of wars. We are tired of fighting for an earth that some seem to care about and others don't. We are tired. Of course we are crying. I cry all the time these days. I cry when I'm in a meeting for ending solitary confinement, listen to stories of survivors. I then cry at poems. I cry when I hear fellow ministers who are so anxious about our climate, our earth, and yet remain oh so hopeful. I cry at songs. I cry a lot in my car. I cry about the numerous losses that we have all collectively incurred, the ones I have personally felt, and the ones that are still to come. I let myself cry, and most often I feel at least somewhat better, or at least more attuned to reality. I feel a release, and I also feel ready. In a recent conversation with one of my organizers, we talked about the fear when we encounter when trying to organize. The fear of everything going up or already being in flames. The fear that is already too late. We talked about how to move from this fear, leaving this place of fear so we can actually move. We talked about what it meant to move from this fear and recognizing that part of this move is seeing the new beginnings, the hope and possibility that when systems, when what we see as normal changes, when it breaks down, when it ends, there is possibility, there is hope for new systems, new potential, new hope. Whether or not we're able to build new and better systems remains an unknown. But that possibility, the possibility that as our world shifts, there could be better systems and ways of being, I think needs to be felt more. But first we have to grieve. We have to grieve and accept our tears as Jacob's tears, tears that are a part of us and also an expression of our love for life and beauty. In an article about eco-anxiety entitled, "How Can I Stay Hopeful as the World Burns?" Aisha Mirza interviews Robin Wall-Kimmerer, author of the beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. Mirza asks Kimmerer how she stays hopeful, and she says, "The grief is heartbreaking, but what I try to do is to feel that deeply. We can't look away from it because to me, grief is the measure of how much we love the world. Grief can paralyze us, it can bring us to despair and hopelessness, but when we recognize that that pain we are feeling is ecological compassion, it's love for a world that is strong and fierce and says, not on my watch." Kimmerer goes on to say, "I always ask myself and others, what do you love too much to lose? Commit to that and know that it's our responsibility to pick that up and carry it through the narrows of climate change. That's what the world will look like on the other side." It is no joke to feel grief deeply, especially when there is so much to grieve. But I think it helps when we know that in part to grieve is to love. As Bell Hooks reminds us, to be loving is to be open to grief, to be touched by sorrow, even when that sorrow is unending. Even if sorrow is unending, I think we can take comfort that so is our love. To be touched by sorrow is to know you love, and to love is to grieve. The full quote from Adrienne Marie Brown that I quoted earlier goes, "Remember, you are water. Of course you leave salt trails. Of course you are crying. If there happens to be a multitude of griefs upon you, individual or collective, fast and slow, small and large, add equal parts of these considerations. That the broken heart can cover more territory. That perhaps love can only be as large as grief demands. That grief is the growing up of the heart that bursts boundaries like an old skin or a finished life. That grief is gratitude, that water seeks scale, that even your tears seek the recognition of community. That the heart is a front line and the fight is to feel in a world of distraction. That death might be the only freedom. That your grief is worthwhile of your time, that your body will only feel as much as it is able to, that the ones you grieve may be grieving you, that the sacred comes from the limitations, and that you are excellent at loving. Our broken hearts certainly have a lot of territory to cover, but I have hope and knowledge that all of our frontline hearts can cover it. I think it's going to take a lot of work, but not more than we can handle. To want to survive in itself is a beautiful thing. To want to survive in a broken world on flames is even more beautiful, and perhaps it is, at its core, hope. I have found spaces to grieve, and I continue to find spaces to grieve as I continue to move, moving from meeting to meeting, from legislative action to legislative action, crafting and creating moments of joy and delight where there are none, and treasuring them when they just pop up or come along. Let us nurture our longing to survive. Let us remember why we fight, and let us remember this by creating and finding joy. Let us find and enjoy the orchids that grow in complete darkness, and let ourselves cry and grieve, remembering our pain is love, and that we've always had more than enough of that. Of course you are crying. Of course we are crying. Let us let the tears flow as reminders of how deeply we are in love with this world. Now join in song in hymn number 128, For All That Is Our Lives. For the closing words, I would like to do a blessing of the hands. I invite you, whether you are on Zoom or right here, to hold your hands up as you are willing and able. Blessings on all these hands, apart and in physical space, together in worship, together in spirit. Bless the hands that know grief. Bless these hands that feel and track heartbeats. Blessings on these hands that are called to the labors of love, the labors of liberation. Bless these hands that bring comfort, care, that bring forth hope, that bring us together. Bless the hands that organize, that pray, that cook, that help with programming, that clean, that sew, that paint. Bless the hands that dance. Bless the hands that together do the work that needs to be done. May these hands receive as well as give. May they continue to unite with other hands. And may we all be held in the blessing that is hands coming together in love, in grief, in gratitude. Blessed be.